Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Heidegger, and I am super, super stoked about the guest that I'm about to have. We're going to make a special announcement as well, folks. We're going to have some changes here at MBR, and I'm really excited about it. Before we get there, I want to welcome to the program for the very first time, Summur Rayn. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful being here with you, Steve.
So there's so much we want to unpack here. We literally had a 30-minute conversation. It's like we got to tape, and we kept on talking about stuff, and it's really cool to make a new friend here and really get to know Summur. And so I wanted just to use this as an introduction to my audience of Summur Rayn. Now, many of you are Mormon Stories people or people who watch Mormonism live, and you probably are familiar with Summur. For those of you who are more faithful, you may not be as familiar with Summur, but she is the next big thing. And I'm really excited to
Thanks.
have this collaboration with her. And I wanted my audience to get to know Summur because I think this is really an important topic I want to talk about. Now, folks, there's been a lot of things happening in the world of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're seeing a lot of people leaving the church. We're also seeing a lot of people that are taking more of a nuanced view on things. We're seeing people like in mixed marriages where you have somebody that's very conservative and then maybe the wife or the husband or the spouse is not so. We have this really complex thing going on in this world. So all of you know this. You all have experienced this. You have family members that are left. You have family members that maybe are questioning things and friends. And how do we navigate that world, right? Because this is unknown territory. It's like how do we negotiate this? How do we, remain friends with people or keep people in our lives, a family that maybe aren't as faithful as you want them to be, or maybe they left the church, but you still want to have a relationship with them. That's the conversation we're going to have today. We're going to get to know Summur as well. Summur, you are just really a fascinating person because you have had this faith journey, and I'd like for maybe you just to talk a little bit about your faith journey a little bit because it's kind of you're transitioning a little bit, but you're still having this struggle, and maybe
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about your story so you can share it with the audience.
Just a quick background. I was raised in the church. My father was he was a New York Jet, and then he went over to the Oakland Raiders. And while with the Oakland Raiders, he won a Super Bowl in '81, January of '81, and met Todd Christensen. And while speaking to Todd Christensen, my mother spoke to his amazing, wonderful wife, Kathy, who I still keep in touch with today. They were introduced to the gospel. They met the missionaries. My dad jokes, even to this day, that he was invited over for dinner and the missionaries showed up. And he was thinking, wow, this will be easy to remember their first name. They're both named Elder because he didn't realize it was Elder in the last names. He's like, oh, Elder and Elder. But they joined the church in '83, and I was 3 years old. My the second oldest sister, I'm the oldest of six. So number five was just born. And my parents were just looking for direction. My dad grew up Baptist in the South, the segregated South at the time. He actually had never even seen a white person until high school year. He was part of some type of religious, let's visit different religions group. And he said that in high school, he actually visited the Mormon church as it was known then, or the LDS Church. And that was the first time he'd ever even seen a white person. So it was a very, very different upbringing from my father. And then my mother was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, which is in the Caribbean by the Venezuela. And she was raised Catholic, but I also have a lot of family on that side that is Hindu. So just a speckled past of religion, which I personally love that I have that upbringing. But they converted, were looking for something for us so that we can connect with God in some way. And because they both had a different upbringing, they were able to kind of come together and say, let's search together.
Hmm.
And they found the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And my dad retired from football. We stayed in New York because we were in New York and California. We stayed in New York. And that was my upbringing. I grew up in the church. My youth groups would go to Palmyra. That was when we moved to Pennsylvania. So it was a good like 4 hour drive. I remember we would drive up there, we'd have hotel stay. And so I grew up in the church. I knew the young women motto. I did Trek. Trek was a pioneer Trek for those that may not know. I did not want to go, but it was one of the most spiritual and amazing experiences I'd ever done. So
Wow.
I am grateful that I did it, but I'm also grateful I did it in Pennsylvania, because I think being that three of there's only three LDS members in my middle school, and one of them was my sister. It was nice to have those kind of experiences that people were having in Utah or Arizona or Idaho, where there's a bigger LDS base, because it was a way to connect, right? So I'm not pioneer lineage. So that's not something I would really be able to understand without something like Trek. So anyway, so I grew up in the church. But because my parents were converts, I do think um, I was raised a lot differently than most LDS people were raised. My mother was very strong. She was a stay-at-home mom, but she was someone who didn't take any flack. So I always tell people I grew up in a bubble within a bubble. My mom she just didn't put up with nonsense. If anybody bothered me, I've told this story before, but I played volleyball, loved volleyball, ended up getting a college scholarship for volleyball. But when I was in ninth grade, I was playing volleyball, had practice, but then I had young women's Tuesday nights. Where we were, the church was 45 minutes away from where we lived, because again, it wasn't a big LDS community. So I would go straight from volleyball practice and go straight to young women. And I would have my shorts, which were just above the knee. They weren't short. They were just above the knee. And then I'd have my knee pads and all that. And my young women president told me that I could not come to young women anymore unless I changed and wore something appropriate for young women. And I remember going home and telling my mom, and my mom was furious. And she went in that Sunday and she said, first of all, do not talk to my child without me present. And second of all, you need to be thankful she's even coming, because she has volleyball practice, but she knows how important young women is. So that was my mom, right? Where we understood the gospel, we were faithful members, but she always said, think for yourself, and if something is wrong, stand up for it. I mean, closed mouths don't get fed, right? So you need to be able to speak for yourself.
Hmm.
Um, my father was and still is very a believing member. He
Just real quick, Summer,
was, oh yes,
your father's name? He's a very prominent person. So
yes, I
bring that
I
up.
this is what happens. I just say dad, dad, dad. So Burgess Owens, like I said, he played in the NFL, 7 years with the Jets, 3 years with the Raiders. He is now currently the congressman for District 4 in Utah. Very proud of him. He's serving his second term right now, and he's gonna be reelected in November for the third term. So this November is reelection for us. But I love my dad, Burgess Owens. I can say it all day. I'm just so proud. He shaped me in the sense of knowing what kind of man I wanted to find for my husband. My dad would sacrifice so much. I just remember uh, when I had early morning seminary. I don't know. I've heard in Utah they kind of had early start, or sometimes they'd have it in the afternoon. For us, it was 6 o'clock in the morning, because we had to go before school started. And so my dad would wake up early, maybe 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, I don't even know, to do his own scripture reading. And then he'd be awake to read with us before we went to school. So he was just one of those pillars of um sacrifice, but without realizing it was sacrifice, because he always was so grateful and so happy, and just living the gospel for him just was worth all those sacrifices. Like I said, we were living in New York, but then we moved to Pennsylvania when I was around 12. But the closest temple was Washington D.C., and that's actually where I was sealed to my parents, was the D.C. temple. And that was a good, I want to say 4.5, 5 hours away drive. And he was a temple worker, so he would go every Saturday, drive one way to temple, work in the temple, and then come back. I mean, there were just certain things that he said, this is important. um but like I said, we kind of grew up in a nuanced environment, which I didn't realize at the time. But we always had family home evening, but we had it on Sundays, not on Mondays. We never ate out on Sundays, but my uncles were not members, so we would still, for New Year's Eve, go to their parties, and there would be drinking, but it wouldn't start till the kids were upstairs sleeping. But there was this kind of a balance of, we not even love the sinner, not the sin. It was beyond that. It was, we're not even looking at them as sinners. It was, this is my uncle, these are my aunts, this is my grandparents. It was never a thought of, they're different.
Mm.
I remember hearing growing up, we're the true church. But the way that that was kind of explained at home was, we have the fullness of the gospel, we have the priesthood, but people have their own journeys. And however they connect to a higher power, it doesn't, as long as they're a good person, it really doesn't matter. So growing up, I had more non-member friends, obviously, than member friends. But even when I started dating, I never an LDS person. It was always non-members. But for my parents, it always was about, who are they as a person? What are they doing? What's their character? Um, and I also grew up with, it was kind of The Secret, that book, The Secret,
Mhm.
that kind of mentality before people even knew what The Secret was. My dad would always, we weren't allowed to, call each other names, jerk, idiot. We weren't allowed to say that. My dad used to always say, the mind can't take a joke. So you don't jokingly call yourself stupid, or we
Mm.
don't say that. And he was always so positive. My mom was the same, but I just remember when I was 16, I was driving to school and I got a flat tire. I want to say right when I was leaving the driveway, I get this flat tire and I go in and I say, Dad, there's a flat tire. And he says, Man, I am so glad that happened in the driveway and not on the highway.
Yeah.
So he just had this mentality. My mom had the same mentality, that we just, an attitude of gratitude, right? You just, no matter what happened, you're always thinking, it could have been worse. I'm so grateful that God was looking out for me. So that was my upbringing. Um, I wanted to be a lawyer, um, only because I loved to argue. I still do. If you ask my husband, he'll contest that. So I just thought, man, I would love to be a lawyer. I always ask questions. At 4, I remember asking my mom, why is your handwriting the same as Santa's? Like, I was always looking at things. And so I wanted to be a lawyer. And long story short, I ended up spending my first semester at BYU, and that's when I decided to get into law. And then I decided to change majors to communications, and I got accepted to Newhouse at Syracuse. So I ended up going from Utah back to the East Coast. My parents were still in Pennsylvania at the time, and I was only 3-hour drive, which was really, really nice for me. Um, I am very grateful for my Syracuse experience, because some people love BYU, and I had a good experience at BYU, but for me to go to Syracuse, it was the time to test my character. I wasn't being forced at BYU at the time. I don't know if they still do this. Whenever you got in late to your dorm, you had to swipe a card. And so they knew what time you were coming in. And if you came in too late, too often, you might get, a random call from your bishop to come in and talk. And even though that wasn't a problem for me, I never missed curfew or anything like that. It was nice to be in a place where I was tested. You know, people were drinking, they were doing drugs, and I could say no, as opposed to being in an environment where it just wasn't there and you don't know what you might say. And again, you know, everybody's different, but for me, it reminded me a lot of my upbringing where I'm around friends who do not necessarily believe what I believe, but they know what I believe. And I'm able to pick friends on that level because they're respectful of me and I'm respectful of them. So I went to Syracuse. From Syracuse, I ended up working for the Oakland Raiders. That was in 2001. So Jerry Rice was there, Tim Brown was there, Charles Woodson, those guys. Great experience. But then I changed from public relations to community relations and went over to the Eagles.
Oh,
And Coach Reed was there. Andy Reid was there when
okay.
I was there. So it was a completely different environment.
And,
I
you're-
came
and just
from
so Andy Reid is LDS, right?
that's yes, that's what I was gonna say. To
Yeah.
go from the Raiders, who
Yeah.
was just they haven't changed.
Mhm.
They've been the same. They earned their name Raiders for a reason.
Yep.
To go from that to Coach Reed, who was all about character. I mean, he did. If you were talented but had no character, he didn't want you on the team, right? And Reno Mahe was there, and who else? There was some great. I mean, Brian Westbrook, Brian Dawkins, those guys. But there's Chad Lewis was on that team, and Reno Mahe. These are LDS players, and I remember Reno having some of the non-members go to a singles ward with him once, and he was married, but he says, you know, let me have you check out this church. So that was the environment there. It was a very nice. I was living back at home, and I wasn't active when I was out in California, but because the family member I was living with wasn't active. But when I came back home, I was able to kind of go back to my home ward, and I started going to the Philadelphia young single adults ward there. So it was a great time. I was there for 2.5 seasons. And then I decided to throw it all away, and I became a flight attendant, an international flight attendant for 7 years. I thought the Eagles was my dream job until I became a flight attendant, and then that became my dream job. I just loved it. Um, so as a flight attendant, um, I was still believing member, but on the East Coast, we don't really use the term Jack Mormon. That wasn't really something I heard until I went to BYU. You're either active or you're not. Because there's no degrees, right? You're one of five in high school that are LDS in a school that's 900 people. And so you're either active or you're not. And if I wasn't going to church, I just made sure people knew my family's LDS Mormon at the time, but I'm not, because I didn't want them to look at what I was doing or maybe who I'm hanging out with and say, oh, that's how Mormons act. I felt like there was more of not pressure, but more of a spotlight when you say, I'm LDS and no one's ever met an LDS person before, right? You want to make sure that they know what that means. So when I was a flight attendant, I was living with three other people. One of them was from Texas, and her family's actually LDS as well. But we didn't go to church. We weren't active. We were pretty low on the totem pole of junior seniority, so we always worked on Sundays. About 4 years in, I made the decision that I want to become more active and proactive in my activities. So, whenever I would fly internationally, I would leave Saturday night and I would land wherever overseas on Sunday morning. I would get in a cab and go to whatever ward was there. So that was a great experience because I was able to see, the church in Norway and the Britannia Ward, which is the London Ward and London Single Adult and Bristol. And so it was nice to see the church is the same everywhere. You could feel the Holy Ghost everywhere. Um, But I always remember, even when I wasn't going to church and couldn't go to church because of my schedule, I always knew God was with me, like no matter what. And again, I don't know if that's a nuance thing, but we were always raised, no matter where you are, no matter what you are doing, you can always get on your knees. He's always there for you. So that was my flight attendant years. And then I was on call in 2009. I was on call for Beijing. So I can't, when you're on call, you've got to be within 2 hours of the airport. So I was like, I can't go far, but let me go check out. I was living in Jersey. I said, let me go check out the ward in New York. And that's where I met my husband, the singles ward in New
Okay.
York City. And so I was just sitting there by myself and we
Hey, I'm
struck
just
up a
curious, Summer. I'm just curious.
conversation.
Was part of the reason you were attending church was that was it possibly to look for a mate as well? Was that motivation?
So funny enough, it wasn't at
Huh.
the time. Um, Again, this is going to be a little different, I think, for those that are more on the Orthodox side, maybe the way they were raised. My parents were more focused on me getting an education, me making sure that, I'm in a career that I love. They never pressured me. So I was kind of dating, but I was a flight attendant. No one wants to date a flight attendant. They think that we're gone all the time. And so I just remember um, I enjoyed Singles Ward because I could relate to the lessons in my life more than Family Ward. Family Ward, they're talking about kids and stuff, and Singles Ward, they may have a marriage lesson here and there, but it's not based on you're already married. So that's why I was going to Singles Ward. I did not think I'd meet my husband at a Singles Ward. As I said, I dated all non-members before this time. So I was kind of just hanging out and just seeing people. And then I met Chris, my husband, and he was in the Sunday school. And I just remember he was the only person that didn't have scriptures, but he knew all the answers to what the Sunday school teacher was teaching. And I was so impressed by that. I thought it was so cool that he was talking to me, he wasn't paying attention, and then the teacher would ask something and he says, "Oh, I know this." So anyway, we ended up talking, and a year later we ended up getting married. We had lost contact for a year, and then he was studying for his ER. He's a resident, an emergency room resident, right at this point, and got a job the following year in Utah. So we reconnected before he left, and then I ended up moving out to Utah, and we got married in the Bountiful Temple. So that's a little bit background for me. I have 3 kids, and um, kind of traveled all over Utah. We were in Salt Lake County. Now we're in Utah County. But I will say I was one of those very studious LDS members. I loved seminary. Even though it was really early, I was one that just marked up everything. I always had the student manual, or Hugh Nibley, who, for those that don't know, it was an apologist for the church. He passed, but he has so many books and he would break things down. That was me. I was one of those search, ponder, pray people. I didn't like surface level. But I always had questions as well, why this and why that? And then I'd always circle back and get the answer and come back. So I remember just everything was wonderful and great. And I remember somehow stumbling upon the Blacks in the Priesthood essay. And this was in, I want to say 2014, 2015.
This is the gospel
Um,
topic. Would
the
this be the gospel
gospel
topic?
topic essays,
Okay.
yes. And I had never even heard of the essays, actually. And you know what? It's probably 2017. It was a little bit after my second was born. And I stumbled upon them, and I don't know how. I don't know if someone in church was talking about it, but it is church approved. It is on the website. And I went on and I read it, and I was very upset. I was very upset by it. And I think the reason why I was upset by it, I think, is different than what most people, the reasons why they are. growing up on the East Coast, like I said, my parents were converted in 83. The priesthood ban was lifted in 78. So it was not something that ever affected us as a family. I remember hearing about it growing up. My parents knew about it, but we were never given a reason. We were never told this is why. It was more just it happened, just like polygamy happened, and it's not the way it is anymore. And so when I read the essay, it was the first time I'd heard reasons that people had used or people had said the curse of Cain, that Black people were not as valiant in heaven. I had never heard that. I'd never heard of Elijah Abel. Elijah Abel was a Black man that was given the priesthood by Joseph Smith. I'd never even heard his name before. So even though the essay, for some people who may have heard things before, it cleared up things for them, it gave me a lot of questions. And most of the questions were, number one, I thought it was just a priesthood ban. I had no idea it was a temple ban, right? I didn't know that as a Black woman, I would not have been allowed in the temple and been sealed to my family. But it broke my heart to hear someone like Elijah Abel had the priesthood and then it was taken away. And so I just remember I cried. I read the essay and it really impacted me. My father is what they call ADOS. He's American descendant of slavery. We've been able through the church to be able to do family tree and track his lineage all the way to Burgess Silas. I'm sorry, Silas Burgess. So his first name was actually his great 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 grandfather's last name, and he was an 8-year-old. It brought over in the belly of a slave ship. So we were able to trace it all the way to then. But it broke my heart to hear of people who are of my ancestry that had something and then it was taken away. Mm-hmm. And for some reason that hurt me more than never having it ever, right? I don't know why, but to me it made it more real to hear it, to see a name and to see this man had it and it was taken away. So anyway, I remember praying about it and just getting a feeling of this is something that I'm not going to get an answer to. But that's okay. It's okay that I don't have an answer and just feeling okay not having an answer, which is a little different, but that's where I was there. So that was 2017. And then last November, I revisited the essays again, and I don't remember why. I don't remember what it was. I believe it was, there's been a lot of controversy about Brigham Young and the university, Brigham Young University, being named after him and things that he had said. I don't remember why, but I ended up looking at the essay again, November of 2022. And in the essay, it says that Brigham Young had promised that Blacks would have the priesthood. And that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I ended up digging into it and seeing that that's not exactly what he said. And so that's kind of where my faith journey began, where I just started asking questions. I just said, this doesn't really make sense. Let me dig a little deeper. Again, stayed on the church approved sites. I had never heard of John Dehlin, never heard of Mormon Stories, never heard of Bill Reel. I didn't know who any of these people were. So I was just going through just Joseph Smith history papers. I was reading Saints, just kind of widening my, broadening my horizon on that level. And then I was on YouTube and the algorithm kicked me over to a Mormonism Live, Bill Reel episode. And it was actually an episode on the witnesses. I believe, listening to it now, I believe he was still in a transitional state. I've never asked him where he was, but he was wondering about the witnesses and did they physically see the plates? Did they see it spiritually? And I know, Steve, that you've had people on that have talked about that as well. But it was such a different way to look at the witnesses, the three witnesses and the eight witnesses testimonies. And so that's kind of where my journey started. I just kind of started reading more and looking into things more and realizing that some of these sites, I didn't know who they were, so I didn't know that they were considered anti. And so I think I was able to kind of walk into it a little bit more open-minded. I don't like negative, and I don't like negative assumption. And so for me, again, I haven't had the time to look through every podcast out there, but the ones that I was drawn to were the ones that were more, let's break things down.
Yeah.
Let's start with this is true, but what if this isn't? It was more just the academic thought process of let's really look at this thing. Let's go into the history. Let's look at journals, things like that. So that's where I was in November. I ended up going to Sunstone, given by Lindsay Hansen Park, who is just I'm in awe by her. She's amazing. I listened to her A Year in Polygamy. I loved that because I got to hear these stories from their diaries, their journals, the polygamous wives of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. So yeah, it's been an educational journey, but it's one that I don't regret because it's so wonderful to just understand more, right? To understand things that I've been taught all my life, but kind of like with the priesthood ban, like we're not gonna get into that. But then when you get into it, to know that you can come out on the other side,
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world. Knowledge is not necessarily the end of the world. You need to balance some things sometimes. You need to pray about things sometimes, but that's okay. I feel like that's where God wants us, Heavenly Father wants us to be. I will say where I am now is in a place of um I still attend church. I'm still active. My husband is a believing member, what they call TBM. He is more orthodox. He grew up in Utah. His family was inactive until he went on his mission. But interesting story, he actually never read the Book of Mormon until he went to the MTC. So he was very inactive, but he is orthodox, like believing member. I've always was raised, like I said, more nuanced, and so um for me it is a it's interesting to be in a mixed faith marriage where I can look at things and say, you know what, this wasn't right, or I don't agree with that, but still wake up on Sunday and get my kids dressed and know that it'll be okay. And again, I know we talked about, we'll bring this up, but it is due in large part to my ward. I go to a Polynesian ward and I love, love my ward. I don't know if it's because they have their own island traditions. Um, and so it's not as stringent and dogmatic, but I love them, and they are a thinking people. They are a patient people, a loving people, and a very accepting people. So that's where we go, and that's why I think I'm able to still, get into history, figure out what happened, but go to a ward that says, no, I agree, that wasn't great, that wasn't good. So
Well,
anyway, that
great.
that was a lot. Sorry,
That's a
Steve,
lot, a
but
lot to unpack. But
that was
I want to direct people to some episodes I did over the course of the last year or so. 'Cause I had Dr. Amos Brown on my program with the NAACP and good friends with President
yes.
Nelson, and I also had James Jones on, who kind of critiqued Elder Howland's stuff that he had done as well. So we do have, because the race and the priesthood and race and
Yeah.
the church has been this really difficult thing. And I also want to direct people to look. Mark Staker, who works in the church historian's office, I've had him on my show a couple times, early days, hope to get him back on, but he's written that actually we believe that there was this gentleman named, all we have unfortunately is his name, and his nickname was Black Pete, and apparently
Mhm.
he got the priesthood in 1831 in Kirtland, Ohio.
I did hear about that
So
recently. Yeah.
yeah, so it seems to me like Joseph Smith was fine with there being blacks in the priesthood. And so, and this is the thing, it's so funny because I had lunch a few weeks ago with some of the Mormon missionaries locally here. They love me. I mean, they come here, they feel at home. I take them out for dinner. So, moms, if any of your boys get sent to the Tampa mission and they end up doing the Lakewood Ranch ward, that I will
Yes.
make sure that they're taken care of. I want to take care of my Mormon homies, of course.
Yeah.
The thing is that we're sitting and you know what? We're talking about the CES letter. We're talking about
Mhm.
race in the priesthood. We're talking about John DeLynn and Mormon stories. They know all of this stuff. The missionaries know all this stuff now. The folks, the cat's out of the bag. Okay, the
Yeah.
narrative is no longer controlled because, of course, we have the internet and it's
The
all out there.
internet.
The kids have watched all the stuff that's out there. They're fully aware of this world with their eyes wide open, and to
Which
their
is good.
which I
Which
think
is
is
so
good.
good.
Well,
It's so
look,
good. So they're not
is
blindsided.
yeah, because these missionaries, most of the people, like if there's anybody that knows anything about Mormonism, it's probably because they either, that they're going to probably talk about the Godmakers cartoon, or they're going to talk about the
Yes.
Mormon stories. They're going to talk John DeLynn. They're going to talk about,
CES letter.
the CES letter and all this kind of stuff. And these missionaries, I think, at least they're aware, so they're more prepared for it. But and I was just telling them, and I'm just kind of giving my observation because I'm the neutral observer. I just call balls and strikes in many ways for this whole thing. Because I said, people like to say, well, Brigham, and I'm not being critical, I'm just giving you my observations, that
Of course.
Brigham Young was a product of his time. But I pointed out to them, I said, you do realize at the same time, Joseph Smith III, during the Civil War period, had blacks in the priesthood.
Yes.
And not only that, but the Church of Jesus Christ, which is the third largest church in the Restoration, had uh, apostles in their church in the early 1900s, black apostles.
That we're
Okay,
black. Yes.
so the thing you need to understand is that within the context of the Restoration, there were prophetic people that say being a prophet means that you're outside, you're not a product of your time. You
Right.
are actually you're a witness against the current ways of doing things, and you're
You're
prophetic in
right.
that way. And I would argue that Joseph Smith III, as well as the Bickertonites, and I'm sure there's other groups too, they're part of the Restoration, and they got race in the priesthood right from the beginning, during the
Yeah.
time when it wasn't politically correct to do it. Also, another thing I will add on to this is that, evangelicals have a history with racism as well. People
Hmm.
don't realize that the reason why the Christian right started in many ways was because they wanted to keep segregation. That's why Jerry
Yes.
Falwell in the 1960s burned a bunch of his tapes from the 1960s from his sermons, because essentially it showed that the founding narrative of the Christian right in this country was not abortion, it was actually
It
segregation.
was segregation. Yes.
Exactly. So we have a race issue too. But this is the thing: no criticisms from evangelicals were ever directed at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for the priesthood ban. And for most of the history, the criticisms were on the doctrine. To them, it was a non-issue as well. So we have a race problem too in the evangelical world. So I'm not trying to just
That is
show,
so interesting.
yeah,
No, that's interesting. I knew obviously the evangelicals, I mean, it was a product of their time. I knew that there
yeah,
was race issues, but I never correlated those two together like that.
yeah, yeah. Like they never, that to them it wasn't an issue. The
Right.
priesthood ban, because in many ways the like even Billy Graham and I think Martin Luther King both said something similar, that the most segregated hour in the United States is on Sunday mornings. So this is kind of this. I just want to talk about the totality of the history. I don't want to just go and say, well, I'm going to bash
Absolutely.
Brigham and I'm going to praise this person. I just want to talk about there's a lot of complexity when it comes to race within Christianity, American
Within
Christianity in
Christianity.
particular.
Absolutely.
So these are, and this is the thing, we're going to have these honest, frank conversations, and I want to do it in a way that's not to try to bash or destroy people's faith. We just need to speak the truth. We need to
Yeah.
acknowledge the real history and not sugarcoat it. What do you say to that, Summer?
I'm right there with you. I mean, amen, Steve. I think that that's what needs to happen. And I love that the missionaries that you said, I just want to go back to that they know about the CES letter. I didn't know about the CES letter last November 2022. I'd never even heard of it. And so I feel as though it is so important. My mother used to always tell me growing up, knowledge is power. And the way she was saying it was, make sure you don't give too much knowledge about yourself, about your family, to people who aren't worthy to know those things. Don't open yourself up to a person because you just met them. And so she was saying it in that regard. But it can also be weaponized if you don't know. And I think that that is what's been going on for the past few decades. I think that's why Sandra Tanner made
Mhm.
such an impact with her books, because people didn't know. I remember going to Palmyra and seeing these anti-Mormon pamphlets, and we were not allowed to look at it or anything, but it was talking about Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And I remember growing up and I never heard that. I know people in Utah, especially those that have pioneer lineage, they say that they knew. We did not know. I did not know. It was just Brigham Young, and it was because they needed to do it to cross the plains. Too many men were dying, or, there were all these reasons. I never knew about Joseph Smith. And so, again, I feel as though knowledge is power, and we can't be scared about what we think the end result might be. So we say we're going to keep ourselves in ignorance.
Yeah.
Um, Something else that I grew up hearing all the time from my dad: ignorance and free can never be.
Mm.
Um, you cannot think that you know if you are knowingly saying, I want to be ignorant. And I understand. I mean, this isn't just a religious thing, it's a political thing, it's a identity thing. It makes you feel better to say, I'm going to close my eyes to that and I'm just going to feel, right? I'm going to feel like this is what I need to do. But we live in a time where there are powers at work. There are things that can bring you down. Whether you want to believe that that is a spiritual thing or whether you want to believe it's mental. I mean, you think about all the anxiety, depression, things that people are struggling with nowadays. These are real issues. And I feel as though if you're not willing to say, let me open myself up to knowing my background, knowing my own history, knowing the history of the faith that I'm a part of, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt when you find out, because whether or not you want to know, it's the truth, right? It's history. What you're just saying about evangelicals, that's history. It is history to know that Joseph Smith was not the first to talk about the curse of Cain.
Mhm.
That was something that was very, very widely accepted during that period of time. But if you're saying, oh no, it's just the LDS Church that believed that, it doesn't matter what you want to believe.
Right.
This is the truth.
Yeah.
And when you find out the truth, if you wanted to ignore it all this time, that's what's gonna hurt. And I think too, Steve, it's important to um I can't speak for evangelicals because I don't know. I just know in the LDS Church, we pride ourselves on knowing, right? We know the answers, we know why we're here, we know what our purpose is. um I had to get to a place where I said it's okay not to know. It's okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I don't, you can speak to the evangelist type of a mindset, but for us, it is very difficult to let go and say, wait a minute, uh, if this isn't true, then I don't know this. But I've prayed and I've got to a point where Heavenly Father has told me directly, it's okay. I have felt a overwhelming peace of it's okay to not know. You may know in a year, you might know next week, you may never know, but that's okay. It's okay to not know. Just continue to learn and continue to be connected to that higher power, because the
Mm.
spiritual experience that I had when I was active um is not any less than the spiritual experiences I had when I was inactive, when I was a flight attendant. I had powerful spiritual experiences. And that does not get taken away because I find out about the CES letter.
Mm.
It just doesn't. So I think you can speak better to, how evangelists feel about not knowing certain things. But I think as human beings, we want to know so bad that we're willing to just say, I don't want to know the bad things just so I can hold on to this knowledge over here. And it just doesn't work.
Well, the thing for me is that history is messy. People
History
are
is messy.
messy.
Yeah.
I think that we do a great disservice to Joseph Smith if we try to make him into the Ken Dow. Uh, this just he was absolutely perfect looking, and he was this
Yeah.
handsome man. And I tell people, said, I was telling the missionaries, I said he had surgery when he was a young boy. He was walked with a limp, and he had a
Yes,
walking stick.
right there.
None of the church movies show that. I just want real portrayals, and I also think that I look at it this way: that Joseph Smith, I take with all his imperfections, all the criticisms you
Mhm.
could throw at Joseph Smith, and I'd be like, it actually makes a stronger case for him to be a producer of scripture than a weak one, because he's just as human as David, just as human
Definitely.
as Solomon and Abraham and Moses and all the patriarchs, who are all flawed men who we'd have serious issues with. They did terrible things. David was
Yeah.
sleeping with 14-year-old girls on his deathbed,
Yes.
with the virgin.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So it's like, so I'm like, so for me, I look at it and say, well, Joseph Smith, if anything, with all the flaws and all the criticisms there is that one can direct towards Joseph Smith, actually makes a better argument, because in favor of him as being a prophet and being
Mhm.
a producer of scripture, because he seems to actually check off a lot of the boxes. And I
Because
think
God works through imperfect people. God
yeah,
works through imperfect people and always
that's the
has.
and that's the thing. That's, to me, that's why it can be very instructive. Where I feel like a real kinship with Joseph Smith. I feel real. I do feel kind of a spiritual attachment to the man. That's why I can't. These evangelicals don't understand, who criticize me, and I do get attacked. And honestly, I was on the phone with John Dehlin yesterday, and I was just kind of talking through, processing some of the.
That's why he didn't call me back. No.
Well, it was a very quick call, because I just wanted to tell him, like, look, John, I know that what you must go through is probably even the thousand times more than what
Yeah.
I'm going through.
It's tough.
I said, it's just hard. It's hard to have people attack you when you're a public person. So I just want to prepare you, Summer, because you're making the jump here. You're getting that it's not going to be easy, but it can be really healing too.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
this has been a healing journey. I'll tell you, this is the most wonderful thing that I've been able to do, because I was isolated from the world. I cut myself from family, friends, everybody. I didn't have anything. I was lonely. All
Wow.
I had was Mormonism to keep me alive. And so my friends were Joseph Smith. My friends were Brigham Young. My friends were those people, the pioneers. That
Yeah.
was that was the world that I jumped into. So I fell in love with Mormonism. And in turn, it saved my life. Okay. So that's why this is like, and to me, I look at it this way: God's going to use whatever tool, and God used it. I don't know. It's a crazy story,
Absolutely.
but now I understand that this was all part of my spiritual journey, and also part of the plan, which was,
Absolutely.
I I went through what I went through, and I don't recommend going through what I went through. But I will tell you that it's been so helpful to me, because now I'm able to go through the hell that I went through. Look, folks, it was a tough, tough, tough time. Okay. But now I've been able to come back and tell people, hey, even at the most hopeless moment where I had basically just given up on everything, there's still hope there. You can live a full life. You can defeat depression and anxiety and stress. You have the
Absolutely.
tools within you to do these things. You just need to believe in yourself. But also, then and like, last year I was on Mormonish, and they were like, what about Christmas time? How do we handle it if people who like left the church and they have all these? I said, just build your own community. So this is what I do: is I have my own
Wow.
community now, and that's the key thing. And really, what I wanted, actually, this is probably the opportunity I wanted to talk about was, okay. So, folks, a couple years ago, there was this wonderful human being, part of her book club. There's about a dozen of us. Nobody knew who we were. And I started joining this book club. It was with Rebecca Biblioteca. And then later that
Okay.
summer, as I started the channel and maybe had 200 subscribers, I had Rebecca on my channel. And she told her story about her crazy temple experiences and stuff like that, which, of course, they kind of recorded on Mormonism Live recently. And that was the beginning of my friendship, or my relationship with Rebecca, where she would then later become my co-host. And now, of course, she's become her own big thing now. And I'm very proud to be the one who found her, identified her as a talented person, and wanted to say, like, okay, Rebecca, I'd like for you to be my co-host. Well, now that Rebecca doesn't have the time to be my co-host as frequently, she's still considered, still will be one of my frequent co-hosts as well. Maybe not as frequently, but I want to announce to everybody, I asked Summer last week and she agreed to it. Summer is going to be a co-host here on Mormon Book Reviews.
And I'm wearing a
Yeah,
bibliophobia
it's so
in
appropriate.
honor of Rebecca Biblioteca because I adore her. She is amazing, and they're big shoes to fill.
Yeah. Well, and she's a legend. So, you're just gonna
Cute.
but I believe in you. I think you've got what it takes. I saw in Rebecca, she had what it takes. And all those people who have her as a co-host, you should give me props because I was the one that found her, okay? Not you. And I also want to give props to Gene Judson of Latter Daily Digest, who actually
Yes,
is having
Gene.
him as a co-host as well. And I thought that son of a gun, he beat me to her. That's fine, Gene. Good job. You identified talent. That's great. Welcome to the Mormon Book Reviews community, Summer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so excited. I'm so excited, and I do want to give a shout out to Gene because I met him last year at a John DeLynn event, and it was my first event ever to kind of meet him. And Gene said, after we talked a little bit, he said, "Would you like to co-host this show that I have and just be an occasional guest co-host? That's Latter Daily Digest." And I did it for the first time, I think 2 weeks ago with him. We had RFM and stuff, so it's been a lot of fun on that end, and I'm looking forward to coming on over here and helping with interviews and just navigating this in between space, because we're all on a journey. I think that it's just important that everyone knows so they don't go through what you were describing, Steve, that there are people that are where you are, where you've been, and where you're going to be. And I'm just very honored to be part of that space with you.
Well, thanks, Summer. I really appreciate it. And there's so much more of your story that I want to have you to tell to my audience because it's so fascinating. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to introduce to my audience Summer, who's going to be somebody just to watch out for. She's going to be part of the conversation, part of the dialogue. And this is the thing, folks. Again, I have faithful members on my show. I have critics come on my show. I have atheists come on my show. I have Christians come on my show. I have Catholics and Buddhists and you name it, LGBTQ community. Everybody's welcome to this safe space that is Mormon Book Reviews. And I think it's really important that we have this place where we can be civil and we can have these hard conversations. We can tackle the issues. And just be honest with people and not try to go one direction or another. Or like I tell you this, I could choose a lane if I wanted to, but I don't want to do that because this MBR occupies a very unique space in the Mormon this world that we're in. And
Mhm.
it's a show that is more scholarly than probably a lot of them are because I have a lot of people from BYU on the church historian's office. I have a good relationship with the church, and I want that to continue. But I also have good relationships with some of the leading critics of the church as well. But again, if we're just trying to just be honest with each other and decent, and not try to attack each other, but just be civil. And even people tell me, said, "Look, I don't like John DeLynn, but you're right, Steve. The Bible does tell us to pray for our enemies and to turn the other cheek, and that we need to take more of a Christian approach." And I just try to say, hey, are you following the example of Christ? And I think all too
Yeah,
often we're not doing that. And let's try to just follow Jesus's way and not be judgmental and be kind to people and turn the other cheek and forgive them. And for those who despitefully use you, learn to forgive, because once you can learn to forgive other people, you can also learn to forgive yourself. And I think that's the key
1,000%.
thing too. And you know what?
I
Also, Summer, I have to tell you, it sounds like your parents just did a fantastic job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I feel so blessed. I feel so blessed to have the parents that I have, and just to been able to grow up in an environment where um, all the best parts of the gospel I had, but all the bad pieces of the culture just didn't affect me. And I will say that that was something as I was kind of going through this journey that I felt a little bad about because I'm seeing how other people have had trauma and things that were not great in their lives. And that I think is why I also want to be in this space for those people, just to know that there are people here that will listen and hear and they've been there. Because I personally have not experienced a lot of these things, but I have friends that have. And so I love what you said. Just let's treat everyone with kindness and love. Just because we have different point of view or different thoughts or different beliefs doesn't mean that we can't sit and talk. I mean, growing up, I remember political discussions my dad used to have, and they were cordial. and they could
Mm.
get up and disagree and say, okay, well, I'll see you next week.
Yeah.
The world is changing and they're being a lot more polarizing. And I do think that we as a people can change the rest of the world and set the example of let's just talk. Let's just talk, even if we don't agree. I remember, and I don't know where this came from. I don't know who said it, but I always thought growing up, there by the grace of God go I. And I'll just say anonymous, and Steve could do the research to find out who that was. But it always made me think, no matter who that person is that I am judging, that could be me in different circumstances, in a different family, in a different environment. There by the grace of God go I. Just remember that we're all doing this thing called life, and we're all trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
and just treat each other with kindness and love, and we'll get through it.
Amen to that. And I think we talked on the phone the other day where I said I don't know Christian or an agnostic Christian. It's like I
Yeah.
think I don't know should be the better answer than I
I
know.
don't know.
I
Yeah.
just don't know. And that's okay. That's
That's
fine.
okay.
You can't know. You can't know everything. You can't know the
Yeah.
mysteries of the universe. It's all we can contemplate them. We can think about them. We can see about our role in them. We can catch glimpses of the divine.
Yeah.
And perhaps be able to feel spiritually connected to others and to God and everything like that. But we really don't know because of our limited capacities. But that's fine too. I'm accepting
It's
of that.
okay.
And
It's
but to think
okay.
that you have all the answers and you have it all figured out and this and that, it leads to dead end thinking, and I feel bad for people that are there, but that's where they're at. And so I want to be respectful of
Yeah.
that too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just help them through that journey as well.
Amen.
Because I think that is what happens is when you think you know and you think you know, and something changes and you realize this one thing you knew, you no longer know. It's a dark place. It's a dark place to be because you just start questioning everything. And I just want people to know we've all been there. Whether it's not even about faith, it could be there with anything where you think you know someone will be there for you, and then they're not, or you know that this is going to happen, this job that you're going to get, and it doesn't. We've all been there,
Yeah.
but it's okay. It's okay not to know. Just know that there is a better day tomorrow. There is a bigger picture out there. And no matter what you believe, just know that, we love you.
All
We're
right.
here.
Well, I love you, Summer. You're an awesome human being. I think you're going to be a
Thank
great
you.
asset to our channel. I'm really excited about where this is going to lead. I really think that you're going to really enhance the channel with your perspective. I think also I love the fact that you say you're nuanced and you're grappling with things, but
Yeah.
you love the church and you love the people and you really do care about them. And this is the thing too. I love you all too. And I care about you
Yeah.
immensely, wherever you're at, whether you're in the church, out of the church, whether you're an evangelical, you're an atheist, it don't matter to me. I love you and
We
appreciate
love
you
you.
because you're all fellow image bearers. And let's not forget about that. So, well, Summer, I am so glad you came on today.
Oh, thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me on. I love this. I love this. And I am so looking forward to working in the future and becoming a co-host, occasional co-host with you, and getting people on and just kind of rolling up our sleeves and getting our hands dirty in this middle space of just helping people get through things.
That's great. This is so awesome. This was a conversation I needed. This was really good. I tell
Oh,
people my channel, me doing my channel is my therapy. And today I thought was a great session. So, folks, what did you think of this episode? What did you think about Summer's story? Very interesting, isn't it? And probably many of you probably know her father. Maybe talk about what kind of person your interactions with her dad, being a congressman and an NFL player. Interesting guy. I'd like to meet him one day. And just tell us your stories as well. Maybe where your faith journey, where you're at, maybe the struggles you've had. Have you read the CES letter? Did that affect your testimony? I had a gentleman who was a Southwestern Airlines flight pilot sitting next to him. He read Saints. He read Saints and he left
yes.
the church after reading Saints. So everybody's in a different place and everybody's approaching these things very differently. So we need to be respectful of where people are and know that I get to talk to these people whose shelves have broken, or maybe who have looked at the history and still remain faithful. I talk to all these different people. It's really important to get these perspectives. So I'd like for you to leave those in the comments. And what do you think about Summer and being my new co-host, and that's pretty exciting. But don't worry, we're going to have we have plenty of different co-hosts on this program, and all the different voices are going to be listened to. So folks, just remember, in the description there are links for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. And so please do. I couldn't do it without the financial supporters. I really do greatly appreciate you. And remember, the most important thing is this, folks, remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.